Hi everyone, I'm super excited to be here on the stage at Digital Dragons. I hope so that you had already an amazing day, and I'm super excited that I can kick off this day with my presentation about open world designer position. So I hope so that it will be working. So my presentation is called "Is there an open world designer on board?" So I'm Magda Jankowska, and I work as open world designer in the announced open world action RPG in a fantasy setting at Techland. And my previous experience was connected with supporting Dying Light as a game designer, where I had a huge challenge to keep our amazing community engaged even after years of release the game. Besides that, I have more than 3 years of experience in mobile game development, where I was working on live ops, features, monetization, and so on. So my background has taught me a lot about working on small and large structures. Both in GaaS as a service and in live ops, it's crucial to not break the core experience. It's important to add something refreshing, but without breaking what we've built previously. So today, I'm super excited that I have the opportunity to talk about open world design, and without further ado, let's get started. So as you can see, as creators or as game developers, in the last few years, open world games have gained a lot of popularity, and this is one of the most important trends in designing video games. Giving the player freedom in exploring the world and the possibility to create their own paths and journey. We basically create a virtual home for our players that they will live there for the next days, or at least next many hours. So, of course, it requires a more dedicated narrative structure than in typical linear narrative, but as you can see, there's so many great games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Witcher 3, White Hunt, Red Dead Redemption, but at Techland we are also focused on making open world games like Dying Light 2 Stay Human, and of course our next big project. But of course, besides of being a huge trend, the definition of open world designer is still unclear, and sometimes it's hard to grasp what we exactly doing in the project and for what we are responsible. And this is the main reason why I decided to say more about it and help in recognition of this truly amazing position. And yeah, today I'm going to talk about open world designer position, what it means, what challenges open world designers have to face, and how to overcome them. So when I say open world designer, I often see a confusion, and there's a lot of question. What does it mean? What are you doing in the company? And my colleagues from my team get similar questions as well. As we are getting questions like, so it's like content designer, but a little different. Maybe you are like a game master in the D&D session, but the main quest is pre-written. Or I thought that you are a game designer, but I thought that you were more into narrative. So we were compared to almost every position. There is a tons of variation, like it's almost like XYZ. But you know what? Everyone is right, but of course, kinda. Open world designer has to have a knowledge in multiple disciplines to craft expected experience. But what does it mean? Of course, we as creators have a very hard task to deliver an amazing world where a player will perform certain actions and immerse themselves in. But on open world designer shoulders, there's a really special task. Make them believe that this world could really exist. That events, situation, using game system, systems are reasonable and placed in proper moments. As I said before, that open world designer has to have a knowledge in multiple disciplines to craft expected experience. Firstly, our main goal is to understand what experience we want to show, the experience of the story. Is it a feeling of danger, maybe hopelessness? Maybe we want focus player attention on the world itself. Secondly, we have to ask ourselves a question. What does it mean to the player? If we, as creators, feel and understand this problem, this experience, like players. Based on answers, we can start thinking about methods, tools, and techniques, how to achieve the results, how to transfer the results into the game. Open world designer is responsible for believable physical emanation of a story and lore in game's world. But in fact, it's a very important is the way how we understand the lore definition. During my daily work, I use the definition created by Polish ludologist Professor Rafał Kochanowicz, that lore is a knowledge about the world presented through the exploration. This definition is focused mainly on the player's experience, not on the narrative itself, but it helps me in thinking about how set the particular part of the story in the game's world and make it recognizable and understandable by exploring. But to achieve this, as open world designers, we cannot forget about gameplay. Numbers, statistics, balance tells a story as well. During our daily job, we need to support these two worlds. They have to be merged. But how to achieve all of this? So we must remember some rules. So I will present today mine, which I follow during my work. Rule number 1, you build a world to serve the story. You build a world to serve the story. What story do we have to tell? Is it a 19th century Wild West or maybe sci-fi futuristic? Who is the main character of the game? How he will move? How fast? It's a very important question for us. Will he or she use high tech? Knowing the answer helps us with set up the foundation for the world, its density, bits, points of interest, infrastructure. What is at stake? Where is a dilemma, problem to solve? So let's take a look how story can influence on world building in each presented world. So here I choose through 3 examples: J.R.R. Tolkien, George R.R. Martin, and Ursula Le Guin. They were approaching topics of creating worlds differently. Tolkien was focused on showing whole cosmogony of the world. It's metapoetic fantasy about races, dynasties, its fight for restoring the old order and Gondor's monarchy. On the other side, Martin shows the world through characters. What are their passions, motivation to gain power? It's strictly political fiction and focus on character branding. So we all know and remember Jon Snow, you know nothing. Le Guin bases her world on moral dilemma, shows the importance of the traditions, what kind of duties are attached to it, and how people behave in different situations, affected by system, for example, like religions. So here are some games that use specific world building case. We have there The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, Dragon Age series, and Baldur's Gate series. So 3 classic and legendary role-playing games. And let me show you on the examples how they are using the inspiration of Tolkien, Martin, and Le Guin to make their own world building. So the uniqueness of the Elder Scrolls relies on mythology based on original Norse beliefs. In-game methodology is an explanation and tool to understand why dragons came and how a player may be a dragonborn. Through world exploration, we get the info about the dragonborn's history and the history of Skyrim. Designers from Bethesda also showed us the whole gods pantheon of different races like Dwamers, Falmers, and Hagravens. We also can get info about the Druid princess, but this whole experience is not only limited to observation. Not at all. We can also discover location and places, even in the afterlife, connected with the word cosmogony and mythology. Players want to explore the world. They spend a lot of hours in the beautiful land of Skyrim, but it doesn't mean that they know by heart the whole story. The funny thing is that even without the story progression, even in the situation when player skips the main storyline and has no idea what happens there and what will happen, player will know a lot about local dramas, about Nords, about Bretons, Khajiits, and whole races and species of the Skyrim province. Players know a lot about the world, which is dense, filled with content, and mark sites on the map. Even if you are not focused on the story and it's not your main goal, you get a lot of info about the world-building matter by exploring and investigating dungeons, caves, tombs, and temples. The world and its construction is based and focused on cosmogony. But in Dragon Age series, a story is led by narration of the characters through the tasks associated with them. The characters carry values, symbolize the factions and problems of the world. It's important to show the changes in the world presented through the agency of individuals. And now let's take a look at the case of Flemeth, known as the Witch of the Wilds. So this character is connected with the region, but it's not only the thing connected with the quest, which you have to do to complete the game. You can observe what nature says about her huts. You can observe what the climate is like and how gloomy and intensive the wilds are. Flemeth as a witch is a central point of the map, and her presence defines the surroundings. The region is supposed to lead you to meet this character and take the next steps. So in fact, this example shows that you go to the selected district and the concrete character is not only the central point of it, but also it affects the way how the district is created, how the animals, nature, and whole surroundings reacts on players' presence. So these games are focused on the characters. And what does it mean? Very often we are saying that Dragon Age series is character-centric or character-focused. But to be precise, characters are target of the place and actions, and the reason of what happens to the player. And for example, several times we have tasks related to the succession of the throne, or we have to reconcile the founding clans and find some way to solve this problem. The focus is on the influence and presence of characters because they guide us to investigate new districts on the map and let us achieve new steps in the main storyline. So, in fact, they help us as a player to explore and understand more about the world. Also, building a team creates a lot of possibilities to investigate more about fractions, species, the culture of races. The same situation you can find in the, for example, Mass Effect series. And now let's talk a little about Baldur's Gate series. This world is based on ethical and philosophical problems. This matter appears in the situation of the main character and his or her identity. But also it focuses on the main storyline and the relationship between characters of your party. To be precise, characters in your team can come into conflict based on the decision you make. For example, their way of thinking does not agree with the decision you make on the way. Each character you meet in the game has got all motivational ethic systems and own destination. One of the examples is the case of Minsk and Dinaher. Minsk is the one of the most characteristic, most iconic character from the series, and he has a mission. He has got a mission to find and protect Dinaher. It's a part of Minsk imitation ritual needed to prove his manhood. Relation between those characters is very strong, but when you do every quest except travel to save Dinaher, Minsk will start to fight with you. But the creators of Baldur's Gate series use this scheme also on building romantic sequences in the second part of the game, when you are discussing with characters like, for example, Jaheira, Aerie, or Viconia, or any other character with whom you can have a romance. You will see a lot of info about race, species, culture, the way how they understand the world, and how they treat their religion, love, sexuality. It affects the way how they define sacrifice, disgrace, sadness, faith, or loss. The focus is on consequences of your actions as a player. But, of course, you create the world to save the story. But the key element is defining. On what foundations are this world to be built? Do we want to involve the player in exploring the world? Is the key element maybe the character? Or maybe the moral system and putting the player in front of difficult decision? Or maybe we need everything? So we, as open world designers, we are responsible for identification and placing these elements on the map. Rule number 2, world supports gameplay mechanics. World is a physical form of players' possibilities. As I said before, based on story, world building approach, we know the answers, how to build the world, or simply what's missing. We need to find proper solution to resolve problems and create a foundation to support the story. Of course, one of the critical questions is what player can do? What are his possibilities, actions, tools to perform them? Open world designers tell about the world to the player through the challenges like day and night system, NPCs, reactions, or activities. We reuse and combine mechanics to achieve expected result. A very important question is what means of transport player can use, maybe on his foot or by car or maybe by paraglider. The importance of this answer is huge for process of creation the world, as it can change the player's reception of it. The distribution of games mechanism allows the open world designer to develop a certain rhythm. The distribution of activities that requires appropriate skills and abilities, encounters and their frequency, or loot. But I will show it more precisely on the examples later on. And here I found this beautiful example on Reddit. This is an example of Red Dead Redemption 2 map made by one of the Reddit user. On the left side, we can see map from Red Dead Redemption 2, but on the right, experience of the regions. They are of course a lot of factors. For example, the course of quests, the distribution of gameplay beats through activities, hubs, and events, as well as the visual scenery. Because, of course, an urbanized city, it's perceived differently than white forests. But for the open world designer, it's an opportunity to tell a story by skillfully managing the player's actions. If we engage the player to combat during exploration, it should carry a lot of information and story of the place. What did it happen in this place? Why now? For the player, it should be logical and contain a lot of specific information about the world, and it leads us to another rule. Very important, number 3, inform and entertain. Open world designers' responsibility, of course, along with other departments like game design, programmers, level design, level art, is to provide the player with knowledge about the state of the world. Of course, one of the sources can be the main story, but through exploration, we can help its reception or tell an additional story by exploration. An important element is the player's agency, how he will approach interaction with certain elements and what he will see or how much he will see. For example, setting up encounters. The placement of opponents and a specific mix of archetypes will tell the player a lot about the world. What are these archetypes related to? Do they require melee or maybe ranged combat? Or do they require puzzle solving? Or are they prey, which flee when notice you are a highly aggressive predator? You may have noticed posters of Global Athletics Games in Harran in Techland. And Harran, as the host of the event, opens the door for example, for the amount of the foreigners in the city and provides an explanation why there is so many zombies dressed in sports clothes. And a lot of world building stuff lives in little details like basic infrastructure, characters, they influence changing the world. And locations should have their backstories supported by notes, collectibles, gather-ables, or possibility to start a minor quest. We care about the history of these places, about the people who live or used to live there. Our win is when the player enters a given place and actually feels the taste of events that have taken place or are taking place in this moment. And thanks to this, the player can become even more immersed and involved in the world we create. Open world designer creates an ecosystems related to nature and people in the world. So they are very important questions like how people live in this world. How do they gather food? Are they scared of wolves, for example? What are their professions? Where do they go to relax? What kind of culture do they have? What are their duties, responsibilities? What is their moral code? Where is a source of water, for example? Is it allowed to have a weapon or say specific word? Setting up a culture is very important part of creation because not everything should be spoken loud. So with the other departments, we have to work on how to tell the story even without using dialogues or the proverbial finger pointing that player, you should have look at this moment right here. So, rule number 4. Word should guide and entice. So basically, a word is dotted with points of interest, and our role is set up them in the right place and give them proper reasoning. Through exploration, player will gain more information about the lore, so even in open world structure, we can help with it by creating defined points of interest. But how we can do it? First of all, we have to think what points of interest and what scale of it we exactly need. But before that, of course, we have to be on the same page with the definition of it, because the name large, medium, small, is it related to the scale of the building, or maybe time spent in this location, maybe the importance of the reward that is inside them, or maybe everything. On presented example on the screen, I have 3 scales based on the size of the buildings: large, medium, and small. And of course, a small disclaimer that this map has been created only for the purpose of this presentation to show the progress, how we can work on setting up the POIs. So, for the defining goals of the word, we need to think how many points of interest we exactly need. Do we need to show only large, maybe only medium, or maybe their number will change? Depends on the player's height. How they will represent. So, every point of interest have their zone of seducing. So, it can be adjustable to their size or to the reward hidden behind them. Zones can be even overlapping to each other, depends on the vision of the game, but you can already notice how you can control the density of the word and set up, for example, grid and dependency network. Maybe large POI should be surrounded only by small POIs. Maybe we need to add some space before entering something big and probably challenging for the player. Maybe large POIs shouldn't be too close to medium POIs. Of course, rules can be different for open world experience, and the grid can be different for example, the city. Everything comes from the story and needed experience to achieve. Of course, a number of POIs will influence the visibility on the screen, like here. I take some examples from 4 different games, and screenshot has been taken from the hills. So you can see Phoenix, Immortal Rising, Zelda Breath of the Wild, Red Dead Redemption 2, and Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. So, as you can see, every game comes to showing numbers of POIs differently. And you can notice how dense is Phoenix and Zelda, and more calm Red Dead Redemption 2 and Witcher 3 is. But it serves the defined purpose of the world. Reception of the Twilight of Wild West is different than the journey of newbie character chosen by gods to rescue them. And knowledge about the function of every element helps open world designer to track players' path and use potential from it. Depending on the moment and place of the story, open world designer selects methods and the pillars of the world to be shown, or maybe hidden for the moment. Maybe some POIs should be revealed later, when player will get more familiar with mechanics and systems. And a massive part of creation of the world is thinking about roads and paths. They are important not only from functional point of view, but because of course we can create a beautiful POI, maybe this is location related to the village, but how people there transport goods. How do they move between locations? But, of course, a player will follow. First, quests. Second, roads and paths. Paths are a symbol of safety, but also a symbol of the fastest, or at least the easiest way to reach one point, from one point to another. For open world designer, roads and paths open a lot of possibility because, of course, it's guiding to another location and vistas. But we can use also it for surprising the player by showing, for example, ambush encounters there. But if we know that a player will follow the path, follow the road, we can encourage exploration even more by placing interesting stuff off the beaten track. And of course, this role of navigation is taken also by rivers and vegetation. And it's truly an amazing way to show the player something interesting at the beginning and at the end. Player will be naturally drawn by lines and will subconsciously follow them. Vegetation and generally loot can be a great supporter for POIs. And of course, there is no mystery and invitation to explore if everything is shown from the beginning. With strong cooperation with level designers and art designers, we need to think how we are going to present some places. Maybe it should be hidden behind high building, mountain, or surrounded by forest. Do we show the proper number of POIs at this moment? Maybe the player will be overloaded in that moment. For guiding purpose, we can use natural human behavior to encourage players to explore even more, and here are some of examples. So, first one, high objects act like magnet for the player. Player thinks what is on the top, what is behind that mountain. Huge, massive objects surrounded often by fog give us more questions, but there is one way to answer all of them. Climb on. And it's an opportunity to place something there. It can be a massive hub with whole society, interesting activity with rewarding vista to the region. High points also serves as a navigation point, help players with orientation. And it's great place to encourage a player to start a loop that climbing on, gazing on the surroundings, taking your destination point, going down, climbing on, and so on. And of course, visual districts are very attractive, especially when player looks at them from higher point. It can think, what does it hide? What is in that forest, for example? This is a mystery that invites the player to solve it. With visual districts, the player creates a mental map of what to expect, but it can also be a great tool for navigation to the player, for example, opening passages to the next location. And of course, players love to look for connections, not those given on the platter, of course, but those where the player will be rewarded for making conclusions and for the time spent. Creating a network of villages, cities, districts, regions, lands, continents gives player the opportunity to think. How were they connected? What happened in them? How did it affect people, nature, vegetation? Maybe one stronghold is using people from nearby villages to give away all the goods they have accumulated. The open world allows the player to develop an opinion about the world itself and take the next steps based on his experience. And there is nothing more intriguing than breaking a pattern. Over time, we get used to patterns, intuitive, or we can start to catch them. So breaking the established rules is a challenge for the player, where he has to abandon the previously developed solutions. It's no different in the practice of creating worlds. One single point on the horizon will tempt the player, especially if he was dealing with multitude points on the screen. And of course, rule number 5, follow the rules but break them if needed. Of course, rules are needed to work out the dependencies between systems. The players should understand the rules of the world, on what foundation it was placed. We cannot require the player to accept the world if he does not understand where and why the actions are taken. Rules are important for developing a general picture of the world, but in critical situations, they must be broken. In the given example, I added a specific bit to each POI, which is to be reflected on the screen. These are combat, narrative, puzzle, and arcade, and I only assigned combat bits to large and medium points, because I know that there is a quest location and I want the player to be involved in combat there. For small locations, I left narrative and arcade bit because I would like to engage the player in searching for notes or, for example, discovering the loot after a mini game, for example. So the rules are: combat bits are reserved for large and medium POIs, and combat bits shouldn't be in close proximity to each other, should be separated by at least one different bit. But in another area, I need to show a place that is too dangerous, which poses a huge challenge to the player at the given moment of the story. I'm breaking the rule of keeping combat bits only for large and medium POIs and extending it to other POIs. And Phoenix Immortal Rising has a very interesting example of this. The game offers the freedom in movement, includes the management of stamina, where you can climb on every object, but one location, King's Peak. It's covered by areas that completely drain your stamina, making the climbing very difficult task to perform. And King's Peak is also more linear than previous sections of the game, as it blocks some parts unless player follows the path of the mountain. And rule number 6. Always have an answer for why. Although this is my last rule on my list, but it's really extremely important. Sid Meier wrote in his memoirs that when the game is bad, you are stuck in the past. You are thinking, what the hell happened here? On the other side, an average game keeps you in the present. That you can think, okay, it's pretty nice. While in the case of really awesome and good game, you are constantly in the future. You are focused on what is yet to come. And this quote resonates with me a lot because it makes me realize how important it is to not break immersion and, of course, how easily can be broken. For example, by loot. So, of course, there can be some issues with placement of loot, but in Dying Light, it was important to place loot where it would be likely. On such example is police cars, where the player can find, for example, weapons. And this is logical. We assume that in such objects we could find such a thing. But this also applies to plants. For example, we expect algae to be underwater and gas to be in first aid kit. And yeah, always have an answer for why. The answer is not only important for the player, but also for the different teams in the project. If teams understand why something appears in a given place, it's easier to work on giving this place its character and atmosphere. And I mentioned it earlier that important is to know what means of transport player can use. This is important because of the grid shown earlier, and it's presented once again, but what is the key aspect here? Player speed. This will define the perception of the world, the placement of key objects on the map. Should the player spend a minute or maybe 5 minutes before reaching a certain point? What should happen to him along the way? How can we show what can we show in a given moment and given space? Of course, the same goes for dynamic systems like encounters. We can work out on specific bits and timings to support the journey. But, of course, how it works in examples. So I compared two games, Skyrim and Far Cry 5, and this data has been taken after tutorial sections, moving on foot. I specified large, medium, small POIs in terms of their size. For example, strongholds were, for me, large POIs. And I started counting at the time when I had left one specific POI, and I stopped timer when I had reached another POI. And the same rule has been applied to encounters. When moving between POIs, I stopped the timer if a counter appeared. And the element that determines the arrangement of POIs and encounters in Skyrim, it's the cartography of the Skyrim province. So, Skyrim province consisting of several mine cities and or places, for example, Solitude or Bard's College, and a whole lot of smaller POIs and encounters, some of which are marked on the map from the beginning, but or it appears along with quests, or maybe modes, or overhead information. And some of it is discovered by the player himself during exploration. The assumption is that the goal that directs the player in a given direction is the large POI, but in practice it's only a direction indicator. On the way to the goal, the player encounters a whole lot of other smaller and previously invisible POIs, secrets, finds, events, etc., that allow him to gain experience, loot, or level up his character and skills. In this way, POI becomes a point on the compass, but it's not the goal itself to reach it, but to go in this direction. Thanks to this division and the impact on the gameplay and its connection with the leveling, with character leveling system, player can get impression that the player functions in a living ecosystem. He actually goes on a journey with many unexpected events, and he will not always reach his destination, of course. For example, he has to go back somewhere where he can sell loot that slows him down. Of course, if he has too much loot in his inventory. So, when Skyrim talks about the areas of individual realms, Far Cry 5 is about finding your way to clear the area from the influence of the cult leaders. The map is an American agricultural province surrounded by dense forests. As a player, you're constantly in danger, or you should feel that the danger is right behind your back. And you have to be very careful with managing your resources. So what catches your eye, you know, you have to go there. Okay, so my takeaways about open world designer rules. You build a world to serve the story, world supports the gameplay mechanics, inform and entertain, words should guide and entice, follow the rules but break them if needed, and always have an answer for why. And here's my summary about what does it mean to be open world designer. So first of all, open world designer creates experience through a combination of story and gameplay, designs and works on proper placement of POIs, activities, encounters, and societies, creates new systems and helps in using the full potential of mechanics and other systems in the world, and of course connects departments to keep and hold clear vision of the world. So thank you for listening to my presentation. It was a huge pleasure for me.